Welcome to KyCPA's Behind the Numbers. I'm your host, Kimberly Lindsay. And our guest today is Dr. Sammie Parsley, a CPA here in Kentucky, a tax manager with Carr, Riggs, and Ingram CPAs in Bowling Green. He holds a doctorate in accounting from the University of Missouri St. Louis, where his research focused on behavioral accounting. And this is part 2 of Relationship of Leader-Member Exchange on role stress and burnout. Welcome, Dr. Parsley.
Well, thank you, Kimberly. Thanks for having me again today, and I look forward to talking more about the study that we conducted last year, focusing on role stress and burnout in public accounting firms.
Right. And if you missed part 1, you can find that at kycpa.org under the news section under podcast.
Well, thanks again, Kim. We're going to take a look again today at more of the detail of the study that we conducted going back to 2020, 2021, and 2022. Again, the problem of burnout among CPAs, we'll take a couple minutes and just refresh ourselves from part 1. Again, it's a service-oriented industry. Meeting client demands often means, accountants work long hours, strenuous hours, especially during this time of year, the first calendar quarter, which is a compressed busy season. And inherently, firms are going to seem to struggle with voluntary turnover. The research question that I have focused on, and it's certainly a hot topic among not only public accounting firms, but those working in private and those working in various industries as well. We're looking at the effect of role stress and job burnout, specifically on millennial certified public accountants. So going back to the conceptual model that was tested here, the outcome that we're looking to measure here was job burnout. And we know that job burnout leads subsequently or to subsequent turnover intent, the intent to leave. So this study was actually building upon previous studies that had been conducted by introducing this concept of leader-member exchange to the equation. Again, the focus here was strictly on millennial accountants. And for purposes of this study, millennials were those individuals born between the years 1982 and 2004. So just briefly, we'll give you some background on the study itself. A pilot study was conducted early on from individuals from multiple accounting firms. There was an online survey instrument that consisted of 42 questions, 42 items. On average, it took individuals about 6 minutes to complete. Now, there were several participating state accounting societies in this research study. Each state society branded, so to speak, the survey instrument. They distributed that to their membership, through online platforms, newsletters, emails, things of that nature. The data itself was actually collected during the coronavirus pandemic from March 2021 through June 2021. The online survey, each society would keep that open for a period of several days to allow for response time. All the research participants, by the way, were members of one of the participating societies. 11 questions were measuring the construct of role stress. There were 7 items measuring the leader-member exchange concept and 9 measuring the construct of job burnout. And, the ultimate goal here, we're looking at both an unmoderated path from role stress to job burnout, and then we're looking at that moderation effect of leader-member exchange. So all in all, after sorting out the non-millennial participants, a total of 112 individuals were included in this study, and individuals had to choose their functional level within the firm, whether that be partner, manager, senior staff, or other functional area. These consisted of audit, tax, consulting, IS, and other could be more or less anything that did not fall into one of those categories. The average years of experience was between 9 and 10 years professional experience, while the average tenure the participants was almost 7 years. In terms of highest level of education, most participants held a master's degree. The vast majority were licensed CPAs, approximately 95%. So we'll take just a couple minutes and talk about some of the statistics that were gleaned from this study. The analysis of role stress is, looking at the different functional levels. Partners tended to exhibit lower amounts of stress than other respondents. And, to me, that's interesting. I think it's probably indicative of today's firm partners devoting much of their time to things like business development, to things like recruiting in order to maintain client base while delegating some of the more technical responsibilities, things like engagement management to subordinates. Also, not surprising, managers scored high for role stress, especially compared to partners. It's also worth noting here that the role stress dimensions of ambiguity and overload, those tend to be lower under conditions where supervisors engage in higher quality leader-member exchanges. There's a strong negative correlation that we noticed between role conflict and leader-member exchange. So, of course, conflict, you can look at that as, I have multiple managers, multiple supervisors, and, they're giving me conflicting directions, conflicting instructions. So this will point to, and we'll talk about it in greater detail in a few minutes, but we know that there's two major overarching leadership techniques. We can look at transformational leadership versus transactional leadership techniques. And, especially for people in this age demographic that we're looking at, they're going to respond, typically have a better response toward one of those techniques than the other. Partners here, they exhibited the lowest levels of burnout, and, individuals who are seasoned veterans of multiple busy seasons, do they develop certain coping mechanisms that's going to help them deal, with prolonged, intense levels of stress. Looking at just the burnout dimensions, again, as in prior studies, we have the dimensions of 3 dimensions: emotional exhaustion, reduced personal accomplishment, and depersonalization. Those are the 3 burnout dimensions. Those are the 3 dimensions that were measured here. As in prior studies, that dimension of emotional exhaustion, those scores seem to be the dominant burnout dimension in this study. And we know that emotional exhaustion tends to be the best proxy for burnout, which you could also argue is the best proxy for intent to leave. That's nothing new. Staff and senior accountants seem to show the highest burnout scores when we're looking at functional position. This, leads me to believe, hey, maybe there is some type of what I'll call survivor effect here, where your more tenured individuals, more seasoned veterans of busy seasons have developed certain coping mechanisms that, help them deal with prolonged periods of, stressful work environment. Something else that's worth noting here, there was a very high correlation between the role stress dimension of overload and emotional exhaustion. We know through this study, prior studies, emotional exhaustion is a great proxy for burnout. Again, you could argue a great proxy for turnover intent. So one of the things that's really driving that is that role overload dimension. So, in theory, if we can kind of control things like overload, conflict, ambiguity, it's going to help us mitigate some of these more harmful effects that we're seeing with some of these higher scores. It's also worth noting there was really very little variance between male and female scores, male and female burnout scores. Emotional exhaustion scores were slightly higher for females than their male counterparts. while males, they actually scored higher than females in the depersonalization dimension. All right, so what does all this mean? Firm implications. To me, these findings indicate that firms' best prospects for mitigating these harmful effects will be through proactive means, will be through early intervention. And again, it underscores the importance of what I like to call these linchpin positions. Because if you think of the structure of the public accounting firm, it's a pyramidal shape, right? It's a pyramidal hierarchy. There's only so much room at the top. So, the folks that are in supervisory type positions, those will be, to me, the linchpin positions. They need to be well versed in some things some leadership techniques, some things that are trending right now, social intelligence, empathy. And, we mentioned a little bit earlier, transformational leadership techniques. So when I think about these two overarching leadership techniques, one being transformational, the other being transactional, one appeals to individuals' intrinsic needs, transformational, while the other transactional will appeal more towards extrinsic needs, things like salary, fringe benefits. And to me, just through my experience, and I think it's something that you can certainly see with a lot of newcomers, especially recent college graduates. Maybe it's not always about the starting salary. There's a certain intrinsic appeal. Am I doing what I went to school to do? Am I doing something that makes me happy? And being able to appeal to those intrinsic needs is very important. And for managers, supervisors, partners, folks that are in supervisory roles, they need to be well versed. They need to be equipped with those transformational techniques that are going to appeal to those intrinsic needs of their newcomers. And of course, as we become more tenured, as we grow older, maybe those needs change. Maybe those views shift, right? I mean, people, they start families, they get home mortgages, things like that. So maybe you go from maybe more of an intrinsic focus early on, a transformational focus early on, to extrinsic transactional focus later in your career. And it's important that folks in management roles understand that. Firms, they need to encourage innovation. Again, the newcomers, the millennial generation, are going to view the world totally different from their more tenured counterparts, and that's not a bad thing. Firms need to encourage innovation by soliciting feedback from junior staff members. It's not really a problem that you're onboarding new employees, inexperienced employees. Firms need to be able to look at that as an opportunity. Again, even newcomers, recent college graduates, are going to have a lot to offer. It's going to be of the utmost importance that managers provide timely feedback to those junior team members. Firm leaders need to follow up on responses to their ideas, questions, or maybe even constructive criticisms that newcomers might have. Junior team members will tend to have more intimate knowledge of daily hands-on tasks. So these frontline team members, they can suggest more efficient ways to accomplish tasks. Neglect in this area can leave individuals feeling ignored, feeling unimportant. And one thing that immediately comes to mind, talking about onboarding millennials or recent college graduates, they have a lot to offer in the way of IT, right? in the way of communication, different ways to communicate. Another implication in my mind that you really don't see very often is the utilization of what we'll call quality circles. And what are quality circles? Well, these are techniques used to enlist the help of team members through various organizational levels to help solve problems. So, not only is this going to lead to increased, organizational transparency, but you're bringing people together, at different levels throughout the firm, in say a roundtable type format to talk about problems, to be proactive, hopefully, and get different viewpoints on how to go about solving these problems. And it also, at least in my opinion, is going to help enrich certain positions, help enrich jobs, keep people engaged. Increased transparency, can provide the opportunity for enhanced communication. It can lead to increased problem solving between junior accountants and their senior supervisors. These meetings, will provide an opportunity for the organization to expose potential problem areas before they materialize. Firms need to have a formal socialization, a formal onboarding program for their newcomers. Effective socialization of newcomers, should include sufficient training, and that's going to help offset some of these negative role stress dimensions that we've been talking about, things like overload, things like ambiguity. Realistic job previews are going to provide newcomers with realistic expectations. I feel like maybe a lot of times, the expectations of some of our newcomers may not be in alignment with the expectations of firm management. So it's important, that early on, these types of communications take place where expectations are clearly outlined. Newcomers with higher quality relationships with their supervisors, we know that they're less likely to report the negative effects of unmet work expectations. Another implication that we've certainly seen a huge increase in recent years is alternative work arrangements. And for public accounting firms, this could take the form of, or many different forms, right? It could come in the form of, flexible hours, the form of telecommuting, remote work, hiring seasonal individuals, perhaps limiting the number of billable hours during busy seasons. One thing that I have seen in some larger firms, particularly Big Four, is the offering of mini sabbaticals, which could range from 1 month up to read about 6 months sabbaticals. This could be a potential alternative for traditional alternative work arrangements. Lastly, an implication I'd like to talk about is the need for business schools to diversify their accounting curriculums. And the reason I say that, I feel that this study really kind of underscores the importance for leadership in the accounting profession. The demand for leadership is not being met by those coming up through the ranks in business schools. The World Economic Forum puts out an annual report. So each year, you can read about some skills that are trendy, things that are trending right now. Skills that are trending according to the World Economic Forum right now, things like problem solving, the ability to lead others, the ability to facilitate a consensus, critical thinking. These are things that are trending in business and the accounting world. These are types of things that can be incorporated and intertwined into accounting curriculums, particularly within cost managerial type courses.
On our website, kycpa.org, there are several resources for leadership and some of these other topics that you have been discussing. We have Knowledge Hub, who has a number of articles, guides, and then there's also in our news section, we have different articles on the empathy and different leadership skills you can develop. And of course, we have courses that we offer in those areas as well. And we have previous podcasts that have talked about some of how to build these skills. So if you are looking for examples of how to solicit feedback or do formal socialization of the firm newcomers or diversify your accounting curriculums, those things the society has for the past several years been building these resources. It is very important for staff retention and trying to make sure that your firm or company is just developing their leadership.
Yes, lots of great resources out there, Kim, and I certainly applaud the Kentucky Society for their awareness and putting those resources out there to membership.
Thank you, Dr. Parsley, for all of this great information and for providing the study itself. And we were happy to participate. And thank you to the members that answered the questions in the survey. Dr. Parsley's information, if you have any questions, is sparsley@CRICPA.com or sdpvhf@umsystem.edu. This information will also be at KyCPA.org under the podcast, under the news section and podcast section. You can also download the PowerPoint presentation that goes along with this podcast. Thank you again for joining us.
Kimberly, thank you for having me again today. You have my contact information, my email. That's a great way to reach out. If you have any questions, this is something, role stress, burnout, turnover in public accounting, something I'm very passionate about. So if any questions, if you want more details, don't hesitate to reach out. And Kimberly, thank you. And thank you to the Kentucky Society for participating and allowing me to share these results.